Hello and welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. As you settle in for the night, prepare to be immersed in a world of eerie whispers and unsettling tales, designed to both chill and soothe. Now, close your eyes, relax, and let the darkness carry you away. And if these nightly tales captivate you, feel free to join our community for more whispered secrets. Nathan had always believed that the past should stay in the past. When he walked away from his relationship with Emma, he thought it was over. Their love had burned bright in the beginning, full of passion and promise, but over time, cracks had begun to form. Small arguments turned into explosive fights. Sweet gestures became manipulative control, and eventually, the warmth he once felt for her soured into unease. He knew he had to leave before the toxicity consumed him entirely. The breakup wasn't easy. Emma refused to accept it at first. She showed up at his apartment, crying, begging for another chance. When he didn't budge, she turned to anger, hurling accusations, saying that he had ruined everything. He had expected her to move on eventually, find someone new, start fresh, as he had planned to do. For a while it seemed like she had. The messages stopped. The late-night calls ceased. Nathan started to breathe again, believing he had finally reclaimed his life. But then, the coincidences began. At first, they were small things. Seeing her at the grocery store when he ran in to pick up a few things. Spotting her across the street near his favorite coffee shop, pretending to read a book at an outdoor table. At first, he convinced himself it was nothing. After all, they lived in the same city. It wasn't entirely out of the question that they would cross paths now and then. But when he started noticing her outside his bookstore, lingering just long enough to make him uneasy, he knew something was wrong. The messages resumed, this time different. Less pleading, more ominous. "I know you miss me, Nathan. Why do you keep pretending? You can't just erase what we had. I won't let you. You'll see soon enough. We're meant to be." He blocked her number, but the messages kept coming from unknown senders. It was as if she was watching, always knowing where he was, what he was doing. Then, one evening, as he closed up his bookstore and stepped onto the quiet street, he felt it. The undeniable sensation of being watched. A chill ran down his spine as he turned, scanning the empty sidewalk. No one was there, but the feeling wouldn't leave. That was the night he realized. Emma wasn't just lingering in the past. She was here now, refusing to let go, and she was getting closer. Nathan had always prided himself on being practical. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, to let his emotions dictate his actions. He dealt in facts, in reason, in things that could be explained. That's why, when he first started seeing Emma again, he chalked it up to coincidence. The first time, she was at the coffee shop near his apartment, his coffee shop, the place he had been going to every morning for 2 years. It was a routine, a habit, something comforting in its predictability. But that day, as he stepped inside and took his usual place in line, he saw her. Emma was sitting by the window, a small cup of tea in her hands. She wasn't reading, wasn't scrolling through her phone. She was just watching. Not directly at him, but through the glass, her gaze distant yet unmistakably aware of his presence. Nathan's stomach tightened, but he forced himself to look away. They had broken up months ago. She had moved on. He had moved on. Hadn't she? He ordered his coffee, ignoring the way his pulse quickened as he felt her eyes on him. When he turned around to leave, she was gone. No cup, no chair pulled out, just an empty space where she had been. Nathan shook it off. It was a big city. People crossed paths all the time. Then, a few days later, it happened again. This time at the grocery store. He had stopped in after work, grabbing a few things for dinner. As he turned into the next aisle, his cart nearly collided with another. Emma's. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Her face lit up with something that made his blood run cold, relief. "Nathan," she breathed, like an old friend reunited after years apart. He swallowed hard. "Hey, Emma." She laughed, shaking her head as if this were all some cosmic joke. "Wow, what are the odds?" He forced a polite smile. "Yeah, crazy." Emma's eyes flicked down to his cart. "Cooking something special?" "Just a quiet night in," he said, shifting his weight uncomfortably. She bit her lip. "I miss those." Nathan's hands tightened around the handle of his cart. "I should. Do you ever think about us?" she interrupted, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable. Nathan hesitated. The truth was he had thought about them, briefly in passing, but not in the way she wanted him to. He thought about how freeing it was to be without her, how much lighter his life felt. But looking into her eyes, something told him she wasn't ready to hear that. So instead, he said, "It's good to see you, Emma. Take care." And he left. But she didn't. Over the next few weeks, the encounters became impossible to ignore. She was always there. At the coffee shop. At the gym where she never used to go but now suddenly appeared, standing by the entrance, scrolling on her phone, pretending not to see him. Once, he caught a glimpse of her across the street from his bookstore, lingering near the entrance before slipping away when she noticed him watching. Nathan told himself he was overthinking it. That was until the messages started. At first, they were harmless. "Thinking of you. I saw you today. You look good." Then they got stranger. "You never used to drink black coffee. That blue shirt looks nice on you." It sent a cold chill through him. She wasn't just appearing in places, she was watching. Nathan blocked her number. But the messages kept coming. From different numbers. No names, no replies when he responded. Then one night something changed. Nathan had just finished closing up his bookstore. It was late, later than usual. He slung his bag over his shoulder and stepped out onto the dimly lit street, breathing in the crisp night air. That's when he saw it. A small slip of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. Frowning, he approached his car, plucking the paper free. It wasn't a note. It was a Polaroid. His blood ran cold as he turned it over in his hands. It was a picture of him, earlier that morning, leaving his apartment. Heart pounding, he flipped it over. 3 words scrawled in looping handwriting. "See you soon." Nathan's hands trembled. He looked around, scanning the empty street. Was she still here, watching from the shadows? His breath quickened. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just a heartbroken ex struggling to move on. Emma wasn't just lingering in his past. She was here, now, and she wasn't going anywhere. Nathan's world was beginning to shrink. What was once a city filled with familiar streets, his favorite coffee shops, and safe routines had become a maze of paranoia. Every corner he turned, every shadow that stretched across the pavement, felt like it belonged to her. To Emma, he tried to convince himself that he was imagining things, that the photograph on his windshield was just a sick coincidence. But deep down he knew better. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had once trusted, was no longer the same. Or maybe she had been this way all along, and he had just been too blind to see it. The next morning, Nathan left his apartment early, walking at a brisk pace toward the subway station. His bookstore was only a few stops away, and he usually enjoyed the ride, using it as a quiet time to catch up on reading. But today, his book remained in his bag, his fingers tapping anxiously against his knee. He kept glancing up, scanning the train car. Was she here, watching him? A woman with dark hair sat 2 rows ahead of him, her face hidden behind a large pair of sunglasses. His chest tightened. Was it Emma? He couldn't be sure. The longer he stared, the more irrational he felt. He had to stop this. He was letting her get into his head. Nathan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. He needed to do something about this before it got worse. When he arrived at the bookstore, the bell above the door jingled, a sound that usually brought him comfort. Today, it made him flinch. His co-worker, Jenna, looked up from behind the counter. "Geez, Nathan, you look like you saw a ghost." He forced a weak chuckle. "Rough morning." Jenna raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. "Well, you've got a delivery in the back. Might cheer you up. New releases." Nathan nodded, grateful for the distraction. Books. Stories. Fiction. A world where things made sense, where stalkers were just characters on a page, not real people creeping into his life. As he moved toward the back room, he felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. He hesitated before pulling it out, his stomach twisting. Another unknown number. He almost didn't want to look, but he did. "Miss me?" Nathan's fingers tightened around the phone. His mouth went dry. She wasn't stopping. He spun around, scanning the store. The customers browsing the shelves, the quiet hum of conversation. Everything felt too normal, too safe, and yet his gut told him otherwise. He swallowed hard, shoving the phone back into his pocket. He needed to talk to someone who would believe him. That evening, Nathan sat across from his best friend, Mark, in a quiet bar. The place was nearly empty, save for a few patrons scattered across dimly lit tables. It was their usual spot, a place where they had shared countless laughs and conversations over the years. But tonight, Nathan wasn't laughing. "You're serious?" Mark asked, leaning back in his chair. His brows furrowed as he took a sip of his beer. Emma's stalking you? Nathan nodded, running a hand through his hair. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm telling you she's everywhere. She's following me. She's sending me messages. She left a picture of me on my car, Mark. Mark exhaled, rubbing his jaw. Dude, I don't know. I mean, yeah, that's creepy as hell, but are you sure it's her? Maybe someone else is messing with you. Nathan shook his head. It's her. I know it is. There was a long silence before Mark spoke again. Have you gone to the police? Nathan let out a bitter laugh. And say what? Hey, my ex-girlfriend keeps showing up where I am and sending vague texts. They'll tell me to block her and move on. Mark sighed. Man, this is messed up. You're telling me. Nathan took a deep breath, gripping his glass tightly. I don't know what she wants. Mark hesitated before speaking. What if she wants you back? Nathan frowned. Then she's got a sick way of showing it. There was something else Mark wasn't saying. Nathan could see it in his eyes. What? He pressed. Mark sighed, lowering his voice. I just remember how she was toward the end. How clingy she got. The way she used to freak out if you didn't text her back right away. Nathan clenched his jaw. He remembered. He had tried to convince himself that Emma was just passionate, that she loved too much. But now, looking back, he saw the warning signs he had ignored. She hasn't let go, Mark said quietly. And I don't think she plans to. Nathan stared down at his drink, the ice clinking softly against the glass. For the first time, he realized he might not just be dealing with an obsessed ex. He might be dealing with something much, much worse. That night, as Nathan locked up his apartment, he double-checked the door. Then he checked it again. He pulled the blinds shut. He made sure the windows were locked. Every shadow in his apartment felt too dark. Every creak in the walls sounded too loud. And then, just as he was about to turn off the lights, his phone buzzed. Heart hammering, he picked it up. Another unknown number. Another message. Why are you hiding from me? Nathan felt the blood drain from his face. And then another message came through. A picture. Of him. Sitting at the bar with Mark, just a few hours earlier. Nathan's breath came in short, sharp gasps. His hands shook as he stared at the screen. She was there. She had been watching him. The whole time. His stomach twisted into knots. His pulse pounded in his ears. Then the final message. I'll see you soon, love. Nathan dropped his phone. For the first time, true fear gripped him. This wasn't just an ex-girlfriend who couldn't let go. This was a predator, and he was the prey. Nathan barely slept that night. Every noise outside his window made him flinch. The image of the text message, the picture of him at the bar, was burned into his mind. His ex-girlfriend, Emma, wasn't just stalking him, she was hunting him. And worst of all, no one would believe him. The next morning, he dragged himself out of bed, exhaustion pulling at his limbs. He needed to clear his head. Maybe if he just acted normal, went about his day, she'd lose interest. Maybe she'd move on. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. The walk to work felt longer than usual. Every step, he glanced over his shoulder. Every parked car seemed suspicious. He kept his hands stuffed deep in his pockets, phone gripped tightly, ready to call someone, anyone if he saw her. At the bookstore, Jenna was already behind the counter, restocking shelves. She gave him a once-over and frowned. Nathan, you look like crap. Didn't sleep, he muttered, stepping behind the counter. Jenna studied him. Is it because of... He nodded. She's not stopping, Jenna. She sent me a picture. Of me. From last night. Jenna's expression darkened. Nathan, this is serious. You need to go to the police. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. And tell them what? That my ex is obsessed with me? That she's showing up where I am? They'll tell me I'm overreacting. Jenna crossed her arms. What if she does something worse? Nathan swallowed hard. That's what I'm afraid of. That evening, Nathan made a decision. He wasn't going to sit around waiting for Emma to strike. He was going to confront her. He still had her number. Maybe if he called, told her to stop, made it clear he wasn't afraid, maybe she'd back off. His fingers hovered over the call button before he pressed it. The phone rang once. Twice. A click. Silence. Then her voice. Hello, love. His stomach turned. She sounded calm. Too calm. Like she'd been expecting his call. Emma, he said, forcing his voice to be steady. This has to stop. A soft laugh. Stop what? You know what? He snapped. The messages. The pictures. The following me. I want you to leave me alone. A Pause. Then a whisper. I can't do that, Nathan. His grip tightened on the phone. Yes, you can. I don't love you, Emma. I don't want anything to do with you. More silence. Then in a voice so soft it sent chills down his spine. I love you, Nathan. And I know deep down you still love me too. His breath caught. The way she said it, the way she truly believed it, it terrified him more than anything else. You need help, Emma, he said, quieter now. I already have what I need. Click. The line went dead. Nathan lowered the phone, his heartbeat thunderous in his ears. He looked around his apartment, suddenly feeling trapped. Vulnerable. Then his phone vibrated. A new message. From an unknown number. Check your front door. Nathan's blood ran cold. Slowly, he moved toward the door, heart hammering against his ribs. He hesitated before unlocking it, then cracked it open just enough to peek outside. A small box sat on the doorstep. No name, no address. With shaking hands, he picked it up and carried it inside. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at it, willing himself to open it. Finally, he did. Inside was a single item, a Polaroid photo of him, asleep in his bed. Nathan dropped the box. His breathing came in short, panicked gasps. He wasn't alone last night. She had been inside his apartment, watching him. His phone buzzed again. Sweet dreams, love. Nathan sat frozen, the Polaroid trembling in his hands. His stomach churned, his vision blurred. She had been here, inside his apartment, watching him sleep. The thought made his skin crawl. His mind raced. Had he locked the door last night? He was sure he had. But the picture, how? He bolted up, checked the locks, then every window. Secure. No forced entry. Nothing was out of place, except his sense of safety. Jenna was the first person he called. Jesus, Nathan, she breathed. She was in your apartment? Nathan clenched his jaw. That's what the picture says. You have to call the cops. He let out a bitter laugh. And say what? Hey, my ex broke in and took a picture of me sleeping, but there's no proof she actually entered because nothing's disturbed. They won't do a damn thing. Jenna hesitated. What if we find proof? Nathan ran a hand through his hair. Like what? I don't know, Jenna admitted. A camera? Something that catches her in the act. It wasn't a bad idea, but something about setting up cameras in his own home made his stomach turn. He didn't want to prove she was there. He wanted her gone. The rest of the day was a blur. At work, every time the door chimed, his head jerked up, expecting her to walk in. Every time a customer lingered too long near the counter, he braced himself. By the time his shift ended, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. Walking home felt different. The city was the same, but it wasn't. Every shadow felt elongated, every sound sharper. He kept his hands buried deep in his pockets, gripping his keys between his fingers. When he reached his apartment building, he stopped dead. Emma was standing outside. She wasn't looking at him, not directly, but she was close enough that there was no mistaking her presence. Dressed in a long, dark coat, arms crossed over her chest, she leaned against a lamppost like she belonged there. Nathan swallowed the lump in his throat and kept walking. Ignore her. Don't engage. But as he passed, her voice reached him, soft and lilting. Long day, love. His pulse spiked. He clenched his jaw and kept moving. She let out a soft chuckle. You never used to ignore me. His body burned with the urge to turn, to scream at her, to tell her to leave him the hell alone. But that's what she wanted. A reaction. Proof that she still controlled his emotions. So he didn't stop. Didn't look back. Just unlocked the apartment door and slammed it behind him, locking every bolt. His phone vibrated in his pocket. A new message. You always did like playing hard to get. Nathan's hands shook. He threw his phone onto the counter, breathing hard. He needed help. Needed someone to tell him what to do. Jenna. He picked the phone back up, dialing without thinking. Jenna, he said the moment she answered. She was outside my building. 15 minutes later, Jenna was pacing his apartment, arms crossed tight over her chest. We have to do something, Nathan. Nathan sank onto the couch, rubbing his face. Like what? I don't know, she admitted. But this is escalating. She's pushing your boundaries, seeing how far she can go before you react. I don't want to react. Jenna sighed, sitting next to him. She's not going to stop. Nathan leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I know. For a long time, they sat in silence. Then Jenna spoke again, voice low. Maybe it's time you fought back. Silence. Then, I'm coming over. Nathan barely slept that night. Every creak of the apartment, every distant sound from the street below sent his heart racing. He had triple-checked every lock, even jammed a chair under the doorknob, but it didn't stop the paranoia from sinking into his bones. Emma was pushing closer and closer, her presence an ever-tightening noose around his sanity. By morning, his exhaustion was palpable. He splashed cold water on his face and avoided the mirror. The last thing he wanted to see was how much of a wreck he looked. Jenna had texted checking in, and he assured her he was fine. He wasn't. As he left for work, he hesitated at the door, scanning the street before stepping outside. No sign of her, but that didn't mean she wasn't nearby. Every step felt heavy as he walked, his eyes darting to every parked car, every face in the crowd. Was she watching him now? Was she enjoying this, his fear, his paranoia? At the coffee shop, he was distracted, messing up orders, barely hearing customers. His boss noticed. "Nathan," she said sternly, "go take a break." He nodded, stepping into the break room. His hands shook as he checked his phone. No new messages. Maybe she was backing off. A notification popped up. Airdrop request from Emma. His breath caught in his throat. With trembling fingers, he hesitated before tapping the screen. An image appeared. It was him, taken just minutes ago, standing behind the counter, focused on making coffee. His stomach dropped. She was here. Nathan's first instinct was to run. Instead, he forced himself to look around carefully. The cafe was busy. People were sitting at tables, chatting, working on laptops, sipping their drinks. No one looked suspicious. No one looked out of place. And yet, she was somewhere in this room. He gripped the phone tightly and moved toward the front, scanning the faces one by one. Was she disguising herself? Wearing a wig? A hat? He had no idea how far she'd go, how deep her obsession had burrowed into her mind. Then he saw it. A woman, sitting alone by the window, facing away from him. Her long, dark hair curled over her shoulders, but something about her posture sent a chill through him. She was still, too still, as if she was waiting for him to notice. He swallowed hard, took a step forward, and she turned. It wasn't Emma. Nathan let out a breath, backing away. But just as he did, another message appeared on his screen. "Miss me?" His blood ran cold. Nathan left work early. His boss didn't argue. He must have looked as terrible as he felt. The entire walk home, he felt exposed, like prey in a hunter's scope. By the time he reached his apartment door, he was barely holding it together. Inside, he locked everything, shutting blinds, double-checking windows. His phone buzzed again. "You're cute when you're scared." Nathan's hands shook. He threw the phone onto the couch, pacing the room, trying to calm the pounding in his chest. A knock at the door nearly made him jump out of his skin. "Who?" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Who is it?" "It's me," Jenna's voice came through. Relief washed over him as he yanked the door open. Jenna stepped in, taking one look at him and frowning. "Jesus, Nathan, you look like you've seen a ghost." He let out a breathless chuckle. "Might as well have." She closed the door behind her. "Okay, we need a plan. This isn't just stalking anymore. She's escalating." Nathan nodded, swallowing hard. "She's here, Jenna. She was at the cafe today." Jenna's expression darkened. "Then we're going to end this." Nathan met her gaze, desperation and fear battling in his chest. "How?" She took a deep breath. "By making sure she has nowhere left to hide." Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was always watching. No matter where he went, the paranoia followed like a shadow, creeping into every thought, every action. He was tired, physically, emotionally, mentally. His world was shrinking around him, and Emma was the force pushing it closer and closer. Jenna sat across from him in his dimly lit apartment, her arms crossed, brows furrowed. "We need proof," she said firmly. "You need something concrete for the police." Nathan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "She's smart. She knows how to stay just out of reach." Jenna leaned forward. "Then we force her to slip up." He looked up at her, exhausted but intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" The plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. Nathan set his phone on the table, the screen displaying a new message from an unknown number. They both knew it was Emma. "I miss you. Let's talk." Jenna smirked. "She's desperate." "That's good. Desperate people make mistakes." Nathan hesitated before typing back. I'll meet you. One last time. We need to talk. Three dots appeared immediately. She was waiting. Yes. Tell me when and where. Nathan's stomach twisted. Jenna placed a hand on his arm. We control this. We set the terms. He took a deep breath and typed, tomorrow night. Your favorite place. He could almost hear the excitement in her response. The bridge. Midnight. Just us. Jenna nodded. We'll make sure it's not just you. The following night, Nathan stood at the entrance to the old wooden bridge, a cold wind biting at his skin. The area was isolated, just the way Emma wanted. But this time, he wasn't alone. Jenna and two officers were hidden nearby, watching, waiting. At exactly midnight, Emma emerged from the darkness, her expression a twisted mix of joy and relief. Nathan, she breathed, stepping closer. You came. He forced himself to stay calm, to keep her talking. I had to. This has to stop. Emma smiled, tilting her head. Why would I stop? We're meant to be together. His jaw tightened. You're hurting me, Emma. You don't love me, you love control. Her face twisted in rage. That's not true. You belong to me. She lunged toward him, but before she could reach him, the officers emerged, weapons drawn. Emma Carter, step back and put your hands where we can see them. Her eyes widened in shock. You tricked me. Nathan stepped back as she trembled, her hands clenching into fists. You betrayed me, she whispered, her voice shaking. One of the officers stepped forward. This ends tonight. You're under arrest. Tears spilled down Emma's face as she collapsed to her knees. Nathan exhaled, relief flooding through him as the nightmare finally came to an end. A week later, Nathan sat in Jenna's apartment sipping coffee. It's over, he muttered, still processing everything. Jenna smiled. You're free. He nodded slowly, finally believing it. Yeah, I am. The days following Emma's arrest felt like a blur to Nathan. For the first time in months, there were no shadows lurking over his every step, no unsettling voices in the back of his mind. He wasn't checking his phone in a state of panic or waking up in the middle of the night with his heart racing. It was as if he had finally exhaled after holding his breath for far too long. But even though the threat was gone, the scars left behind by Emma's obsession ran deep. The relief he felt wasn't enough to erase the lingering effects of her control. His mind, trained for months to be in a constant state of vigilance, struggled to adjust to the sudden stillness. The worst part was the way his body still responded, jolting at the sound of an unknown number on his phone, a reflex of fear that he couldn't shake. It wasn't just the physical reminders, though. The nightmares were relentless. Every time Nathan closed his eyes, there was Emma's voice, soft and eerie. You belong to me. Sometimes it was a whisper, other times it was a scream. Either way, it was a haunting presence that refused to let him go. It was as though his mind couldn't quite accept that she was gone, that she could no longer reach him. The past few months had been nothing short of a nightmare, and the aftershocks were still rippling through him. Jenna noticed the subtle changes in Nathan, how he jumped at every ring of his phone, how he seemed distant, lost in thought even when he tried to engage in conversation. One evening, over dinner, as they ate in her apartment, she set down her fork and looked at him with concern. You should talk to someone, Nathan, she said gently. You don't have to go through this alone. Therapy could help. Nathan sighed heavily, looking at his food as if it might offer him some answers. I know, he said quietly, but the thought of opening up to a stranger felt daunting. It's just, I don't know where to start. I mean, how do you even talk about something like this? To someone who doesn't understand. Jenna's voice softened. You start by acknowledging what you've been through. You survived, Nathan. You've been through hell, and it's okay to admit that it's left its mark on you. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it all by yourself. He looked up at her, feeling a mixture of gratitude and guilt. Thanks, Jenna. I just feel like I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe again. Jenna reached across the table, resting a hand on his. You will. It'll take time, but you'll get there. I'll be with you every step of the way. 2 weeks later, after much internal debate, Nathan finally made the call. He booked an appointment with a therapist, someone with a reputation for helping people recover from trauma. The first visit was the hardest. Sitting in a sterile, quiet office with soft, neutral-colored walls, Nathan couldn't help but feel vulnerable. For months, he'd been living on edge, and now he was supposed to sit down and talk about it all. But as the session went on, something began to shift. It wasn't easy, but talking about Emma, about what she had done to him, didn't feel as impossible as he had expected. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when the words stuck in his throat, but the more he shared, the lighter he felt. Slowly, with the therapist's guidance, Nathan began to confront the fear and anger that had been building inside of him. He learned to acknowledge the trauma, but he also learned to separate himself from it. He had been the victim of Emma's obsession, but that didn't have to define him forever. It was a process, slow and painful, but every step forward felt like a small victory. Over the following weeks, the nightmares started to become less frequent. The sudden jolts of panic when the phone rang began to fade. Nathan was still cautious, but now it was with a newfound understanding. He had control over his life again. Emma couldn't take that away from him. She had stolen so much, his time, his peace, his sense of safety, but she wouldn't take his future. One evening, after a long day at work, Nathan walked home, the crisp night air biting at his face. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't tense up. He pulled it out and saw a message from Jenna. "Movie night? I heard there's a new thriller out. Should be fun." Nathan chuckled softly to himself, the weight of his past lifting just a little more. He typed back quickly, "Sounds good. Just no stalker stories, okay?" Jenna's reply was immediate, "Deal." That night, as they sat on the couch watching a movie that wasn't nearly as scary as the real-life horror Nathan had lived through, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of normalcy. It wasn't perfect, but it was his. And for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that the worst was truly behind him. As the movie ended and the credits rolled, Nathan looked over at Jenna, offering her a genuine smile. She smiled back, her eyes warm with understanding. He didn't know where his life would go from here, but for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to the journey. It was over, and Nathan was free. Nathan had always imagined that once Emma was gone, once she was finally out of his life, he would feel free. But freedom wasn't an instant relief. It was an adjustment, a slow unraveling of fear that had been tightly wound around his existence for too long. The first few nights after Emma's arrest, he barely slept. Every shadow outside his window, every unexpected noise in the hallway sent his heart into overdrive. Rationally, he knew she was in custody, but the paranoia refused to release its grip so easily. His body had been conditioned to live in fear, an undoing that took more than a simple arrest. Jenna visited often, keeping an eye on him, making sure he ate, that he wasn't drowning in his own thoughts. "You should talk to someone," she suggested one evening as they sat in his apartment, a half-eaten pizza between them. "This kind of thing, it doesn't just go away." Nathan picked at the crust of his slice, sighing. "I know. I don't even know where to start." Jenna leaned forward. "Start with the truth. You went through hell, Nathan. It's okay to admit that." He ran a hand through his hair. "I just feel stupid. I let her get that close, let her manipulate me for so long." Jenna shook her head. "She was dangerous, Nathan. Manipulative, obsessive. This wasn't your fault." He wanted to believe that. He really did. Days turned into weeks. Emma's case gained media attention. Stories of her stalking, the threats, the psychological torment she had put him through. Reporters tried to contact him, but he ignored them all. He didn't want to be the face of a victim, didn't want his trauma dissected for the world to see. Instead, he threw himself into his work, trying to reclaim some sense of normalcy. But normal wasn't something that returned overnight. Even simple things, walking home alone, checking his phone without expecting a threatening message, looking over his shoulder, were all ingrained habits now. One evening, he finally did what Jenna had suggested. He booked a therapy session. Sitting across from a stranger, recounting every horrifying detail, was harder than he expected. But as the weeks passed, he started to understand what had happened to him, started to see the psychological wounds Emma had inflicted. Healing wouldn't be easy, but at least he had taken the first step. 3 months after Emma's arrest, Nathan stood outside his apartment building, watching the city hum with life. For the first time in what felt like years, he wasn't looking over his shoulder. He wasn't scanning the crowd for a familiar face that haunted his nightmares. Jenna walked up beside him, smiling. "Big day today." Nathan chuckled. "Yeah, first real date in a long time." She nudged him playfully. "You deserve this." He took a deep breath. Maybe he did. Maybe it was finally time to move forward. As he walked toward the cafe where he was meeting someone new, he felt lighter, freer. Emma no longer controlled his life. He had taken it back. And for the first time in a long time, he was ready to live again. Nathan had taken the first steps toward healing, but healing wasn't a straight path. It was a winding road filled with unexpected obstacles. Even though Emma was no longer a threat, the scars she left behind remained. He carried them in the way he hesitated before checking his phone, in the way he avoided certain parts of town, and most of all, in the way he struggled to trust again. It had been a few weeks since he had gone on his first real date in a long time. Emily was kind, patient, and understanding, but Nathan found himself holding back. He hadn't told her much about Emma, only that he had gone through a difficult past relationship. The last thing he wanted was to scare her away, to make her think he was damaged beyond repair. But deep down, he knew he had to open up if he wanted to move forward. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank, Emily glanced at him with curiosity. "You don't talk much about your past," she said gently. "I don't want to pry, but if you ever feel like sharing, I'm here." Nathan hesitated, his heart pounding. The words were stuck in his throat, but he forced himself to speak. "There was someone before you," he admitted. "Someone who wasn't who she seemed to be." Emily didn't interrupt, didn't push for details. She simply nodded, waiting for him to continue. "She hurt me," Nathan continued, his voice quieter. "Not physically, but mentally. She controlled every part of my life, manipulated me, made me feel like I was losing my mind. And when I finally tried to break free, she wouldn't let me go." Emily reached for his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "That sounds terrifying." Nathan exhaled, feeling some of the weight lift off his chest. "It was, but I'm trying to move past it." She smiled softly. "And you will. You don't have to rush. Just know that I won't push you. We'll go at your pace." For the first time in a long time, Nathan felt something he thought was lost forever: hope. As the weeks passed, Nathan slowly started letting his guard down. He told Emily more about Emma, about the fear that had consumed his life for so long. And Emily, true to her word, never judged him. She never treated him like he was broken. Instead, she saw him as someone who had survived. Therapy helped too. His sessions became a safe space where he could unravel everything Emma had done, where he could rebuild his confidence and trust in himself. His therapist reminded him that what had happened to him wasn't his fault, that manipulation and abuse weren't things he should have been able to predict or prevent. One afternoon, as he sat in his therapist's office, she asked him a question that stuck with him. "What does freedom look like to you?" Nathan thought about it for a long moment before answering. "It looks like not being afraid anymore. Not second-guessing every decision, not feeling like I have to be on guard all the time." His therapist smiled. "Then that's what we'll work toward." Months later, Nathan stood in his apartment, packing a small bag for a weekend getaway with Emily. It was the first time in years he was allowing himself to travel, to enjoy life without fear. As he zipped up his suitcase, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. He looked different, not just physically, but in his expression. The exhaustion in his eyes had faded, replaced by something new. Strength. He had survived. He had rebuilt his life piece by piece. And now, for the first time in a long time, he was looking toward the future. Not with fear, but with excitement. He smiled to himself as he grabbed his keys and walked out the door. His past would always be a part of him, but it no longer controlled him. He was finally free. Nathan couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was always watching. No matter where he went, the paranoia followed like a shadow, creeping into every thought, every action. He was tired, physically, emotionally, mentally. His world was shrinking around him, and Emma was the force pushing it closer and closer. Jenna sat across from him in his dimly lit apartment, her arms crossed, brows furrowed. "We need proof," she said firmly. "You need something concrete for the police." Nathan exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "She's smart. She knows how to stay just out of reach." Jenna leaned forward. "Then we force her to slip up." He looked up at her, exhausted but intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" The plan was risky, but it was the only chance they had. Nathan set his phone on the table, the screen displaying a new message from an unknown number. They both knew it was Emma. "I miss you. Let's talk." Jenna smirked. "She's desperate." "That's good. Desperate people make mistakes." Nathan hesitated before typing back. I'll meet you. One last time. We need to talk. 3 dots appeared immediately. She was waiting. Yes. Tell me when and where. Nathan's stomach twisted. Jenna placed a hand on his arm. We control this. We set the terms. He took a deep breath and typed, tomorrow night. Your favorite place. He could almost hear the excitement in her response. The bridge. Midnight. Just us. Jenna nodded. We'll make sure it's not just you. The following night, Nathan stood at the entrance to the old wooden bridge, a cold wind biting at his skin. The area was isolated just the way Emma wanted. But this time, he wasn't alone. Jenna and 2 officers were hidden nearby, watching, waiting. At exactly midnight, Emma emerged from the darkness, her expression a twisted mix of joy and relief. Nathan, she breathed, stepping closer. You came. He forced himself to stay calm, to keep her talking. I had to. This has to stop. Emma smiled, tilting her head. Why would I stop? We're meant to be together. His jaw tightened. You're hurting me, Emma. You don't love me. You love control. Her face twisted in rage. That's not true. You belong to me. She lunged toward him, but before she could reach him, the officers emerged, weapons drawn. Emma Carter, step back and put your hands where we can see them. Her eyes widened in shock. You tricked me. Nathan stepped back as she trembled, her hands clenching into fists. You betrayed me, she whispered, her voice shaking. One of the officers stepped forward. This ends tonight. You're under arrest. Tears spilled down Emma's face as she collapsed to her knees. Nathan exhaled, relief flooding through him as the nightmare finally came to an end. A week later, Nathan sat in Jenna's apartment sipping coffee. It's over, he muttered, still processing everything. Jenna smiled. You're free. He nodded slowly, finally believing it. Yeah, I am. Epilogue moving forward. Months had passed since Emma's arrest. The echoes of her obsession still lingered in Nathan's mind, but with each passing day, the weight of fear lessened. Therapy had helped him navigate the emotional scars, and for the first time in years, he was beginning to feel like himself again. Nathan had left his old apartment behind, moving to a new city where fresh beginnings felt possible. The skyline from his balcony was different, the streets unfamiliar, but that was exactly what he needed. A place where Emma's presence didn't haunt every corner. Jenna remained a constant in his life, their friendship stronger than ever. You're actually smiling, she teased one evening as they sat in a coffee shop, watching the world go by. I was starting to think that wasn't possible. Nathan chuckled, stirring his drink. Turns out life without a stalker is pretty great. She smirked. Who knew? There was also someone new. Emily. They had met by chance, an accidental coffee spill, an exchange of apologies that turned into an hour-long conversation. Unlike Emma, Emily wasn't possessive, wasn't manipulative. She was kind, patient, and understanding of the baggage Nathan carried. She knew his past, yet never made him feel broken because of it. One evening, as they walked along the waterfront, Emily slipped her hand into his. Do you ever think about it? She asked softly. Nathan sighed, staring at the rippling water. Sometimes, but it doesn't control me anymore. He looked at her, squeezing her hand gently. You make sure of that. She smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. I'm glad. For the first time in years, Nathan wasn't looking over his shoulder. The past would always be a part of him, but it no longer defined him. He had reclaimed his life, his future, and most importantly, his peace. And that was something no one could ever take from him again.